Hi everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, today I am in the garden. I have some things to check on, some things to probably harvest, and there's one thing that we have decided to be done with for the year. And so I'm going to be doing some harvesting and then pulling all of those plants out. Now, I'll be real honest that we have not been in the garden much at all for the last few weeks because we really thought all hope was lost out here in the garden. We've had terribly high heat this summer for this region of southern Missouri. We've had weeks and weeks and weeks in the 90s and in the hundreds, and that is just not normal for this area, especially not for the length of time that we had that amount of heat. Also within all of that was quite a significant drought. At one point we were 15 plus inches below where we should be at that time of the summer. Our garden plants were suffering so badly, even though we had drip irrigation that came on every day for an hour and a half. The heat was just so intense that it was really affecting the plants. So like I said, we thought all hope was lost, and so we just didn't spend much time out here. But over the last couple of weeks, we've gotten some rain and the heat has let up. And so there's a possibility that some of the garden may be salvaged. So today I want to go through the garden with you, row by row, and show you the good and the bad. If there are some things that can be harvested, I plan to harvest those things. But my big project, first thing, is we're going to rip out all of our tomato plants. There are a few reasons why we're just going to be pulling the tomato plants today. The tomatoes have really suffered. The plants have suffered. The tomatoes themselves have suffered from the heat and the drought. But also, there have been a lot of bugs that have taken advantage of the weakness, basically, of the tomatoes and the tomato plants, and they have invaded. So we have a lot of stink bugs. I've also been seeing leaf-legged bugs, and the tomato hornworms have moved back in. The tomatoes themselves have been suffering from a lot of that bug damage. When stink bugs and the leaf-legged bugs, when they feed on the tomatoes themselves, they put their mouth parts in the tomatoes, which introduces bacteria, and that bacteria can multiply and create rotten spots on the tomatoes. So there's a lot of tomatoes that are just not in good shape and not salvageable. The plants themselves have gotten heavy and fallen over. So you'll see when I show you the tomatoes that the plants are in disrepair, and if we were going to continue with the tomatoes, they would need to all be tied back up. The main reason that we are pulling all of the plants is because, we just have so much going on right now that the tomatoes and the tomato plants are just not something that we can continue caring for. As you know, we are in the process of putting a house on the new farm property. We expected that house to be put in place in May, but it's not happening until the end of August, maybe even the beginning of September. And so that has really tied up our ability to really take full advantage of this garden. So something had to give out of all of these things, and one of those is the tomato plants just need to be pulled out. The peppers and other things that are still in the garden, we can continue enjoying them fresh. We will have time to process them. They don't come on in big flushes like the tomatoes do. And so for all those reasons, the very first project that I'm going to be working on in today's video is harvesting the good tomatoes and pulling out all of the tomato plants. Any tomatoes that are bad or any green tomatoes, we're going to be putting aside and feeding those to the pigs so that there is no waste, and all of those will just be used to grow bacon. So let's get started on the first part of our project today. Well, this part of today's project is finished. I'm so happy Kevin came and helped me finish because it was taking a long time and it was a lot of work. So I'm happy that he stopped what he was working on and came and helped me. So I have harvested all of the good tomatoes, all the bad tomatoes I've put in buckets for the pigs. I've pulled out all of the tomato plants from one full row here and a half a row here. So what that means now is that we can move on to some of the other things in the garden. What I would like to do is to take you row by row to show you kind of the status of the plants that we have left. Some things have made a miraculous recovery and other things just couldn't hold on long enough and succumbed to the heat of the summer. And I just want to show you where everything's at right now. My hope also is to have some time today, before I need to move on to other things, have some time to do some harvesting so that I can bring that stuff back to the homestead and get that processed. So I would like to start by showing you all how the peppers are doing. So this is the other half of that half a row of tomatoes. I planted these with peppers, and I think they're a total of 14 pepper plants. Now earlier in the summer, I did a big harvest of all the bell peppers, and those plants are right here. They are emerald giant. And at the time that I picked all of these peppers, there were absolutely no blossoms on them. So I thought that these plants were going to be completely done for the year. But if you look closely, these plants are getting blossoms on them, which is fantastic. There are a couple peppers that are growing, and so I'm really excited that these might have a comeback. The jalapenos that I have here, jalapenos are not hot or not spicy jalapenos. The first harvest is ripening to a red, and they are getting blossoms on them here for another harvest. So I am really happy about that. You can see all these gorgeous red peppers in here. These are all the red roasting peppers that I grow. The variety is called Ajvarsky, and their first harvest has turned red, and now it is time for me to harvest them. They are also putting on new blossoms, which is awesome. Now these Ajvarsky peppers, even though I prefer them red, which is their fully ripened stage, as a green pepper, they are fantastic. They're mild and they're not spicy, so when you pick them green, they taste like a bell pepper. So these blossoms, even though it's fantastic that they're going to put on more peppers, I'm not sure that there is time enough for them to ripen to the red stage, but that's okay with me. It looks like the ones that are on there right now are going to produce a nice harvest of the red Ajvarsky peppers, and those that grow now, I will harvest green and chop them up and use them as bell peppers. These are jalapeno peppers, and it looks like their first set of fruit is turning red, and they also are producing blossoms, so we're going to get a second harvest of jalapenos. And then the last type of peppers that we have down here are something new to us. The plants are looking great. All the plants are looking fantastic. Look at that. But these chili peppers, I don't remember the name of the variety. We've tried one of them. They're not super spicy. They're not putting on a ton of fruit, but we're giving them a try. They may or may not make it to the next garden for next year. Well, that is how it's going with the peppers. Nice surprise that they're starting to bloom again, and we might have a second go round of peppers. Let's move on to the rest of the garden. Next up in the garden is an entire row of green beans. Now our green beans, we normally get 2 or even 3 harvests in the early part of the summer. Green beans are actually the first thing that I will generally can or preserve. They're just the fastest and the first ready for processing. This year we got 1 picking out of the green beans, then the heat hit, and all of a sudden all of the blossoms that were there ready to produce another harvest fell off. the beans that were still on there that were too small to harvest at the time that we did the first harvest, they were rubbery, then they tasted terrible. So basically, that's still where these green bean plants are. They are producing a few blossoms, but the green beans that they're producing taste terrible. They have no flavor, they're rubbery. So basically, we just need to tear all of these plants out. The green beans are essentially done for the year. If you remember though, we did plant some green bean plants in the greenhouse because we knew that these green bean plants were done for. So we will still have green beans in the future, probably in the next month or so. They're just about to blossom that we can use for fresh eating. We did get some of these. We did get these preserved for winter, that first harvest, but that's just going to be it for green beans aside from the plants that we put in the greenhouse. We're really excited, you guys, to have a greenhouse that we can produce vegetables all year round for fresh eating. It actually really takes the pressure off of how well the in-ground garden does for us here. So even though this is basically almost a complete fail and complete disaster for us, we still, number one, produced enough to have some set aside for the winter, and also we love fresh green beans and we're going to have more of those in the greenhouse. Okay, next up in the garden, I'm just going to pan over here. Next up are the soybeans. So these soybeans, they're edamame soybeans, which means they are grown specifically to be eaten fresh. They grow in a little pod, kind of looks like a pea pod, and inside of there the beans grow and they get nice and plump, and you harvest them in the pod, you steam them and eat the soybeans inside of them fresh, just with a little bit of salt. We like edamame. It's actually pretty much the only soy or soybeans that we consume. We eat it as a snack occasionally, so we thought we would just try it this year. Now, a couple years ago, we tried edamame, growing them, and I'll tell you guys, the plants that we grew the first time were about 12 inches tall. That's all the taller they got. They gave us a mediocre harvest at best, so we were not expecting these giant plants, you guys. Oh my gosh, let me move back. These plants here, they would say they're probably 3.5 to 4 feet tall. I'm 5'5", if y'all didn't know that before. I'm not a tall one. I'm 5'5", and these guys are like armpit high for me. We had no idea that these plants would get so tall. We were planning for 12 inches again. And we thought for sure they weren't going to produce blossoms. We thought for sure they wouldn't produce a harvest for us. But let me bring you in closer and show you what's going on. To our surprise, they're putting on beans. You can see they're a little fuzzy. You can see the beans inside of them are not very plump yet. It's going to be a while before they are ready to harvest. But you guys, this is a total shocker for us. It is totally surprising that, number one, they got this tall. Number two, they've survived this intense heat. And number three, they're actually going to produce a harvest for us. So that is absolutely fantastic. Right next door to the edamame are the okra. And the okra is another thing that we thought was a total goner, total flop for the year. Now, during this intense heat, the okra started looking like it was at the end of its life. Now, I want to explain to you what normally happens for us anyway in this area for okra. At the end of the summer, when it's starting to turn fall, the okra, which generally is like 7 feet tall, these guys, you know, are probably 4 feet tall, so they've grown quite a bit in the last month. Anyway, at the end of the season, usually the okra will start getting like a big ball of flowers all in one spot. I mean, there could be a couple per plant, but all of a sudden, rather than them putting on okra like all around the plant, all of a sudden they'll have like a big central ball of blossoms that will then all of a sudden put a bunch of okra pods on right like centrally. we have noticed in the past that the okra pods don't taste as good. So we decided at that point in the past to just let them go, let the pods get big, dry out, and then that's what we use for seed. Well, about a month ago, these okra plants were starting to do that. They were starting to put on a central area of blossoms, and it looked like they were going to be done for the season. It looked like they were just trying to be done for the season. So we were just, we just left them alone thinking they're done. Well, all of a sudden I come out here to see what's going on in the garden after it's cooled down a little bit and after we've gotten a little rain. And you guys, all of a sudden, they're growing taller, they have lots of blossoms, they're getting lots of new okra pods, and it's amazing. There's like a whole regeneration, rejuvenation of the okra. Now you can see that we do have some big okra pods that need to come off because you guys, we just thought that this garden was completely done with. But we have blossoms, we have small okra that we can start picking. So we're really excited that we can come out here and we might be able to get a good harvest of okra after all. This area is another giant surprise. You guys, this is where our watermelons are and our cantaloupe. About a month ago or so, all of these plants back here looked terrible. They were turning yellow. Some of the leaves, a lot of the leaves were dying, and all of the fruit, all of the melons, both the watermelon and the cantaloupe that were of any size whatsoever, they all ripened all at once. We had 27 cantaloupe that ripened within the course of 3 or 4 days, and all of the watermelon ripened. I think we had about 20 watermelon. Now, we did a bunch of freeze drying. We actually froze a bunch of it to have, in the winter in smoothies and to continue freeze drying it. But we were totally shocked that they all ripened at once. And we thought this area was a complete goner, you guys. Looked awful, okay? Well, all of a sudden, like with some of the other things, and because the heat has kind of died back a little bit, look at these plants. They're going crazy. And to my surprise, it is putting on watermelons, and we have some really decent sized watermelons in here. Here are 2 right here. If I keep digging, I'll find more and more. Here's one. Here's one. Here's a little one starting. And actually, I don't know if you already saw this on the ground here, but I just found this ripe watermelon. It's small, it's a weird shape, but we even have a new ripe watermelon. Now the cantaloupe too, look at crazy vines, blossoms all over the place, just more and more blossoms. And when I look closely and do a little digging, I'm finding cantaloupe. There's another one in there. I'm not sure if you can see it. So, is there enough time for them to grow big and ripen? I don't know. We have about 45 days until the first frost, the potential. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's late. But it is really exciting that these guys are trying to do another round, and they have survived and are trying to overcome the terrible heat and the drought. One thing that did not survive the terrible heat was the winter squash. You can see the plants are completely dead. This was spaghetti squash, and down there are the Canada crookneck winter squash. Now the spaghetti squash, I could tell when they were starting to die back that the squash that they had put on were not going to ripen. They didn't have enough time to produce everything that they needed to inside. They got soft, a lot of them started to get bug damage, and the insides of them didn't develop all the way. Now the Canada crookneck squash, on the other hand, they put on some smaller squash than normal, and it looks like they were able to get through their complete like life cycle, I guess, for lack of better words, and we have some good squash. Now I want to take you through, just show you some examples of what's happened with the squash, and I am going to pick the squash that are still good and bring them home to the homestead. The squash that didn't completely develop properly, they're kind of squishy. This one didn't completely develop, and because it has such a thin shell on the outside or skin on the inside, it has started rotting. Most of these spaghetti squash are not good. They're not savable. This one actually has some weight to it. It's nice and hard, so I might be able to harvest that one. This one here is nice and heavy. No signs of deterioration or mold or anything. So I think that this one is a keeper. Down here, these are the Canada crookneck squash. Most of these look like keepers. Again, nice and heavy. No sign of any kind of rot or anything. There are bugs crawling around, but most of these squash are still viable. They're small, but viable, so I'm going to harvest the ones that are good. The good ones will go in one basket, the bad ones will go in another basket. Bad ones are pig food. Well, that's the end of the squash for this year. About a half of a basket is going to end up going to the pigs, and I have about 3/4 of a basket of good squash. Ended up being 7 spaghetti squash and a bunch of small of the Canada crookneck squash. So could be a lot worse, and so I'm happy with the harvest that we'll have over the winter. Now I am going to do some quick harvesting with you of the peppers, but before we head over to that direction, I do want to talk with you about the last thing that's in the garden, and that is our corn. You guys, look at how tall this corn is. Like I said before, I'm 5'5". That is well over 7 feet back here. It got so tall, it's pretty amazing. Now, this isn't sweet corn. I want to remind you that this is called Dent Corn. It's a dry corn that we can use for corn flour, cornmeal, or animal feed. You could make grits. We don't really eat a lot of grits here, but you could. This is the kind of corn that you would use for that. We're trying it out for the very first time this year. This variety is called Danny corn. It was developed by our friends Danny and Wanda from Deep South Homestead. They live in Mississippi. They've been trialing their corn in different parts of the country. They've been sending people their corn seed to see how well it does, and it's been doing great all over the country. So this is our first growth of this. I think it's doing well. You know, it's grown tall, it's producing ears, it tasseled. The ears have silk and it looks like they're being pollinated well. So we're really excited. This is dry corn, like I said, so you don't pick it early like sweet corn. You let it dry on the stalks like this. So we'll see when it's completely done and drying how well it does. But under the circumstances, you guys, it's doing great. Okay, let's go over to the peppers. I do want to pick a bunch to take back to the homestead so I can get working on that the rest of this week. So let's head over there and see what we can get. The peppers that I want to harvest for sure today are the Ajvarsky peppers that are completely red. I love these peppers. Like I said, for roasting, this is actually a pretty small one. Other years I've gotten really big Ajvarsky peppers. But I'm going to harvest the red ones, leave the green ones, and see how we do. Look at how beautiful these are. Well, that ended up being a nice harvest of the Ajvarsky red roasting peppers. You guys, that's all I have for today. I'm exhausted, but I have other things to move on to on the homestead, things to do. We covered a lot of ground and we got a lot of work done together today in the garden. I hope you enjoyed spending some time with me and learning how the garden has done, even though we had terrible heat and a drought, and it looks like some of it's coming back. Thank you so much for being a part of our life. We appreciate you guys so much. Hey, if you're enjoying our channel and you haven't subscribed yet, we sure would love for you to hit the subscribe button below. Also, remember that really the best way you can help us here on the homestead is just to share our videos. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.